Smartphone apps are changing the way we work. With the push of a button, we can summon services to our exact location, whether that's taxis, plumbers, takeaways, or even masseurs. We think these apps are making the world more efficient, but what if they're not? What if what's really powering this gig economy is something much less sophisticated, like poor worker conditions? To find out, I decided to try it out myself. I'll tell you about my interview process and the contract designed to scare you off asserting your rights. In the 1992 sci-fi book Snow Crash, author Neil Stephenson has a go at envisioning a brutally Darwinistic labour market which sits within a sophisticated digital economy where everyone must fend for themselves without any job security or protection. He conjures up the job of the deliverator, someone who at his own prerogative scouts to make a living out of pizza delivery. Within that economic dystopia, everything bar the physical delivery is automated. The sector is controlled by a mafia monopoly called Cosa Nostra. Guiding the cartel's operations is one single principle. The deliverator stands tall, your pie in 30 minutes, or you can have it free, shoot the driver, take his car, or file a class action suit. But whereas Snow Crash was only a story, today's gig economy is not. What's frightening about that is that the brutality of this system is being lost on those who actually use these apps. The heart of the problem relates to the cost of service. We love the apps because they're convenient and cheap. Technology has something to do with that. But in reality, the jury's still out on whether this is true innovation or just a loss-leading model currently being subsidised by investors and workers. Many of the latter are having to work harder for less money and without the securities provided by traditional employment contracts just because they're called contractors instead of employees or workers. This year has seen several protests by Uber and delivery workers. They say it isn't possible to make a London living wage once all costs are accounted for. They're the ones taking all the risk, while the platforms are making a steady profit at their expense.
We have to pay for a motorcycle, mine costs £2,500. Do you know what I mean? Like, people spend big money on a bike. Then you've got insurance, which costs me £140 every month. You've got to keep your bike maintained, got to get it serviced.
Companies like Uber, Deliveroo and TaskRabbit counter the accusation, saying they're creating flexible, empowering jobs. They add contractors are free to walk away if the work doesn't suit them or if they're not earning enough.
Uber is not paying for tomorrow! Uber is not paying me to be in hospital!
There was genuine anger among protesters over the disconnect between the reality of the job versus the expectations put forward in the recruitment process. But equally in the case of food dispatching firm Deliveroo, they were objecting to the company's unilateral decision in the summer to switch workers from hourly to per drop contracts without any warning at all. Deliveroo is somewhat unique in offering these two types of agreements. To understand some of the concerns of the drivers, I decided to apply for a job as a bike rider at Deliveroo.
Hello, Izabella speaking.
I did so using my real identity. After completing a quick online form, I was through to the telephone interview.
That's right. I'm good, thank you. I was under the impression it's supposed to be quite flexible, right? I'm working full-time, but I'm looking for a supplementary income. It's a media job, so it just involves writing stuff on the internet. Just about the nature of the commitments, so it's a minimum of 2 evenings of 2 to 3 hours on the weekend, Friday to Sunday. And other than that, it's up to me when I can do the time and when I don't have to.
At no point was I asked what contract type I wanted. The terms given were the hourly type, £7 per hour plus a £1 bonus per delivery. But it was stressed I could earn up to £12 per hour or more in surge periods.
So I've got my kit. I didn't get it immediately. I had to go back a second time to get it all because they didn't have the staff on hand to do it the first time round. I was told initially that my shifts would be really flexible, but it turns out that's not the case. Instead, I'm doing 4 shifts a week, 6:30 to 9:30, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday and Sunday. These I had to pre-commit to, and I can't change them now that I've established them. And the ones on the weekend are utterly mandatory, so I have to do them no matter what, otherwise I don't get paid. My zone is London Bridge, and that was my second choice, and at the weekend I'm doing Fulham, which was the only other option for me that was available.
In the end, I delivered 5 orders over 2 separate shifts. On the job, I soon realised it's very hard to stick to Deliveroo's manual. It demands you take your helmet off when going in and out of a restaurant or to a customer's home. But that, plus finding a secure place to park your bike, eats up time and is impractical. Deliveroo also wants you to double check the contents of each order before setting off. But rifling through a bag of hamburgers to check what's a cheeseburger and what's not is inconvenient and unhygienic. The customers I delivered to were almost exclusively urban professionals living in gated communities. As a whole, the app was efficient when working, but exceptionally battery draining. On the second go, the app crashed halfway through the shift and was out of order for more than an hour, leading me to miss out on potential bonus earnings. My orders were back to back, and there was hardly an opportunity to even take a toilet break, which made me feel a little like a rat on a treadmill. If there are errors, you bear the risk. My overall earnings averaged out to be about £8.10 per hour. I also got £3 in tips. London authorities say the capital's living wage is £9.75. Whilst employers aren't forced to abide by that, they are obliged to pay a minimum living wage of £7.20. This turns to £7.50 from next April onwards. But the most troubling aspect of my whole experience was when I read the contract. It said there was no minimum commitment which drivers had to work. But wait a minute.
So it's a minimum of 2 evenings of 2 to 3 hours on the weekend, Friday to Sunday.
Over the phone and in person, Deliveroo had repeatedly told me I had to work mandatory shifts. So there was a contradiction between what I was hearing about flexibility and what was written on paper.
Even within the contract, there seems to be a contradiction. So firstly, it says that you weren't obliged to do any minimum level of work. But then just down the page, it says that you were expected to be as flexible as possible to meet Deliveroo's needs. What really stands out for me about this contract is, well, there are 2 things. The first is the clause which says that Deliveroo riders can't bring a claim to an employment tribunal or any other court where they say that they are an employee or a worker. In other words, this says they can't assert their rights as workers or employees. And then the second clause, just underneath that, says that if they do go to court and they do claim that they are employees or workers, then they will pay Deliveroo's costs in relation to that legal action. These clauses are legally worthless. No tribunal will enforce them. So if they've had that advice and they have still chosen to include them, the only reason they can have chosen to do so is to scare their workforce from asserting their rights.
So it's a form of intimidation, basically.
Yeah, you could say that.
Deliveroo declined to be interviewed, but they did give us a statement, including the following points. Riders are at the heart of Deliveroo, and we are proud to offer them the flexible work they value. They choose when and where to work and for how long, allowing them to fit their work with us around other commitments such as studying or starting a small business. Indeed, over 10,000 people apply to ride with us each week, which shows that working with Deliveroo is popular and valued by riders right across the country. Riders with Deliveroo on average earn substantially more than the national living wage. The Financial Times journalist herself was paid significantly above the living wage, in spite of her completing fewer deliveries than the average of other riders working in the same area at the same time. But the Deliveroo workers I've spoken to insist there's never a guarantee there will be enough orders to achieve the minimum wage, especially after costs are accounted for. There are also parts of the country where Deliveroo advertises rates of £6 per hour plus £1 per drop. At this year's Web Summit in Lisbon, those representing the gig economy didn't seem fazed by growing criticism. Bradley Tusk lobbies Washington on behalf of Uber and its CEO Travis Kalanick. He said low wages weren't the fault of the Uber model.
So sure, there are the black car drivers in London, the taxi drivers who feel disaffected because they are losing business to Uber, although they can always become Uber drivers, by the way. But at least in the US, what frequently happens is the taxi cartel tries to shut Uber down because they want to see innovation, and because Uber ultimately is so much a more democratic system.
Others, however, see it differently.
Are they creating jobs? Yeah, sure, they are creating some jobs, but it's the quality of the jobs that also really matters. And that's where this notion of empowerment comes in. So one of the things that we're told is that these workers can work when they want to, they're self-employed, they have lots of flexibility. But often what we see in practice is that, say for instance with Uber, those self-employed drivers don't set the price, Uber sets the price.
In the gig economy, many companies are using a legal loophole regarding contractor status to turn workers into competing privateers who they control and dictate earnings to. It echoes the old system of feudalism. The workers battle it out to grab whatever work's available in a zero-sum game. But the app companies behave more like medieval robber barons. They are the house that always wins.
There's a high similarity with the broader feudal structure insofar as that is a coercive, inegalitarian, extractive relationship where lords are drawing surpluses off peasants and other workers to line their own pockets and increase their own status and financial power. Lords have the power to vary their terms and conditions as they please. They can switch from taking money rent to cultivating the land themselves directly and saying you have to come and work on the land for so many days a week.
Economist Guy Standing reckons companies are deliberately underpricing their service.
Because they rely on venture capital, they don't have to go public, and therefore they can run an operating loss. And why are they running an operating loss? Because they're deliberately underpricing their service in order to drive out competition who can't compete at that price. Once they've done that, they can raise the prices and then have a monopolistic situation. Today, often within the app economy, it's the worker who has the means of production and has responsibility for the costs of maintenance and the insurance. But the app is pure rentier, a pure rentier. And this is a form of feudalism, but it's a very specific form.
Standing argues instead that unrestricted digitalisation is cultivating the rise of a precariat class, a new social group which exists without the predictability or security enjoyed by the previous generation of workers. And since this digitalisation can't be reversed, he thinks the solution is a universal basic income. But the political will alone to drive it through would have to be extraordinary, and this would take time. They tried it in Switzerland, but the referendum failed. In October, British Prime Minister Theresa May announced the government would conduct a review into the rights at stake in the gig economy. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has even put digital platform worker rights into his party's manifesto. In medieval times, if and when freelancers did pop up in large numbers, they were often met by community disapproval. This forced them to regulate. But for today's gig economy workers, organisation is difficult.
So we're not interested in talking on an individual basis. We're here to talk collective bargaining. That means people representing a wider group of people. They refuse to recognise that the people here are working as a collective bargaining unit, and they refuse to even say the word union.
But some say forging a union is definitely within the realms of possibility. Powell's firm recently won a landmark decision at a London employment tribunal on behalf of Uber drivers. She's optimistic that the law can work on the side of this new precariat class.
The law itself is quite effective. It has this category of worker which recognises that some people might not be an employee, but they're certainly not in business on their own account.
But if these rights are recognised, this could impact competition, as respective costs will have to be passed on to customers in other ways. What we're learning slowly but surely is that the gig economy works by putting living standards under pressure. Despite its success with customers, critics say these apps are built on dubious business models and that someone is always losing out. At the moment, it seems to be the workers. Until anything changes, there's no escaping that what these apps are really doing is popularising the return of an upstairs-downstairs society. Workers, instead of saying "you rang, my lord," just end up saying "you hailed, my lord."